So, I heard we have an hour from now, is that right?
Yep. Yeah.
Cool.
Let's start.
There are probably, so we can discuss this together. I'm not entirely sure what you want to do. I had an idea what I wanted to do, but we can easily change that. So I wanted initially to talk about the European Union, because I believe that debating shouldn't be just about learning how to debate, but what to debate about. And the European Union is a topic that will be reoccurring. So if you want to go to international tournaments, most of those tournaments will probably be either in continental Europe or UK and Ireland. This is very likely because they are most English-speaking tournaments. And you very often have their European Union motions. You probably know something about the European Union. I am pretty sure that I know a little bit more about the European Union, and I would like to teach you some things about that. But since a lot of you are a little bit new to debating, I can understand if you rather want to talk about structural things, so how to hold a good speech, how to structure a prep time. Those are the two things we could talk about. I could do 50-50, talk like half an hour about the European Union, and after that talk a little bit about the whip speech or the last speeches of each side. Or I could just talk about the European Union. I could probably make an hour-long talk about prep time and whip speeches as well, but that depends on you. So
maybe more European about European practice and less about serial debating, I think, because we can explain our newest serial debating by ourselves, and you can give us
maybe something about your own experience.
I can do that as well. How would you like that? You are a little bit newer to debating, if I got that right. Would you like to talk more about debating, or would you like to talk more about things like the European Union, so questions that might come up in debating, so that you have the possibility to know more about the subject?
European Union.
Okay. The European Union it is. Great. So, firstly, how do I know things about the European Union? I studied industrial engineering, so from my studies I had nothing to do with the European Union. But I worked in Brussels for half a year as a lobbyist for E.ON, a large energy supplier, the second largest in Europe. The largest one is the state-owned one in France. There we were working with the different institutions of the European Union, meaning the Parliament, the Council, and the Commission. I will explain the differences a little bit. I worked there and we tried to, as an interest group, try to influence the process and get business interests a little bit more into the legislation, which means that we were the bad guys. After that, I turned to the other side. I'm now working as an assistant to a member of parliament in Germany, Social Democrat, so center-left wing. There we have to do with the lobbyists from the other side, but I also have to do in my work there with certain topics that are closely linked to the European Union. One of them is TTIP. I'm not quite sure if you've heard of that, the Transatlantic Trade Partnership. It's one of the biggest free trade agreements that will be there in a couple of years or not, depending on how the European Union decides. And secondly, of course, it is about the refugee situation, which is a very European topic. My member of parliament is from Munich. I'm not quite sure if you followed the news on the refugee situation, but Munich is the first city that people from the southern route come to. So the southern route means when they go via Greece, the Balkans, Hungary, Croatia, then the first stop is usually Vienna, and then they try to get to Munich to actually get asylum in Germany. At this point, we have the situation that Germany, with a population of 80 million people, will get 1.5 refugees this year, which is a large amount. It's not the largest per capita, that would be Sweden, but it is one of the largest changes that you have in Europe. And you have strong European problems and tensions coming from that. Probably heard of that. The third thing I want to talk about is the Greece crisis. This is part of my field there as well, so I usually get calls from angry citizens that are incredibly annoyed that we are wasting good German taxpayer money on those poor Greeks who don't want to work and just wasting money. And part of my job is to explain to them why that's firstly not true, and secondly, a pretty good idea for Germany to do. But there as well, we have a very strong European component. I would like to bore you first with a little bit of history, because I think the European Union, the history is incredibly interesting. It's no history like any other, and it has the worst starting point possible. So we are talking about after the Second World War, 1945, the end, and then the establishing of a new era. Before that, there were some ideas about European Union as such, but those were usually just intellectual ideas and no political reality. It became political reality in, and this is probably a date that you might or might not remember or want to know, 1932, with the so-called Montanunion, or the, what's the name in English? European Coal and Steel Community, is, I think, the English term, Montanunion. This was between 6 countries. European Coal and Steel Community. Was between 6 countries, the Benelux countries, so Netherlands, Luxembourg, Belgium, Italy, Germany, and France. You must not forget, this is 7 years after the most devastating war that Europe and the world has ever had. At this point, children in German schools were still taught that France is the arch enemy. At this point in time, we had the situation that 19% of the Germans wanted to have parts of France and Poland back. This was a point in time where most people still were Nazis in Germany, at least in their minds, and they weren't convinced that France is a good place or a partner to deal with. And on the French side, it was even worse. So France, Netherlands, Luxembourg, and Belgium were all occupied for several years by the Germans. And at this point in time, the French foreign minister made a proposal to the German chancellor that they should work together on coal and steel. Coal and steel is not what it was today. Today it's just a sector or a part of it. At this point, coal and steel was the cornerstone of the economy. This, without that, at that point in time, 90% of the energy supply were made by coal. Steel was what were made most weapons of. Today, various other things, but steel was the core of it. So, why would a country like France do that at this point in time? Why would the other countries do that? Two reasons, and both have to do with security. Firstly, they wanted to establish that Germany could not rise again. At this point in time, we had talks about the remilitarization of Germany. This is the time where we had the Korean War and the first start of the Cold War were going on in Europe. So the idea that Germany, if they get a military again, is interwoven in a structure where the basic materials for weapons are communitized, where they are not held by states, where you have the possibility to control them together. This is the idea that there will be no more war from German ground and German soil. The second thing is a thing that people tend to forget and tend to not know that much about. There were good reasons for France to do that. Most of the German coal and German steel were in the British sector, so the British occupied sector. The French people didn't have any access to that. And at the same time, they were fighting the war, the first Indochina War, so the end of the colonialization of France. France at that point was an empire. The Algerian War started 2 years later, so they were fighting wars, and it was apparent to them that they know that they will go on fighting wars. For that, you need this basic materials, but at this point in time, they were under British control. So the idea then was to say, if we can have this Montanunion, this European coal and steel community, we have the possibility to actually have access to that. To a certain degree, that was true for the Netherlands, Luxembourg, and Belgium as well. Belgium had some colonial wars as well, not as fierce as the ones in France, but they were taking part in the Korean Wars as well. So the Benelux states, in opposite to France, took part in the Korean War, and therefore they needed those building materials as well. The idea there was firstly security. Firstly, internal security, and for each and every state, external security as well. This was the founding and the building block of the European Union. This is how all started. So, security and taking care that you don't attack each other. This is the cornerstone. Probably the short version, maybe not the long one. So, the next point we had in, I had to write down the numbers as well, because nobody 58. This was the European Economic Community. This is the first time that free trade got into play, except for coal and steel. We had their free trade at this point as well. But this European Economic Community, at this point in time, we firstly had the idea of a free market. This is like, to a certain degree, a classic free trade agreement. The idea that you have the possibility to trade goods with France, Germany, it's again those 6 countries, Italy as well. You have the possibilities to just trade goods, which was incredibly important because the trade between those countries dropped after the Second World War to 10% of what they were on the previous level in 1932. So they dropped immensely. All of those countries were, to one degree or another, destroyed. They needed to build up their countries. For that, you need as well coal and steel. But therefore, at a second stage, you needed other goods as well. And this is the classic idea: if we all work together, we get a little bit more. This is what free trade is about. And this is an idea of the European Union that lasted, I would say, for 30 years. That the European Union is about nothing but enhancing trade and having the possibilities that everybody benefits from each other. That's the cornerstone. And this founding myth of the European Union is very important. People tend to say Europe is about solidarity, or Europe derived from common values. My personal experience is that's bullshit. That's not what Europe at the beginning was about. It wasn't about common values or the idea that you say, yeah, we are all Europeans, we have a common background. At 52, nobody in Europe believed that they have a common background. Believe me on that. That's just entirely untrue. And those common values were established way later, but were established as a myth. And this is a story that Europe now tends to tell themselves, that the European Union and the European community is about those values. At the beginning, it was not, but this is a story that you tell. And sometimes the story that you tell is getting more important than the things that actually happen. But you should know at the same time, for debating and for real life as well, that this is not how it happened. So, after that, we have, with the establishment of the EEC, we had the Roman treaties. The Roman treaties were the founding stone of this EEC. The interesting thing is, when you look at the Roman treaties, there is the goal and the aim of the European Union. And this is incredible for like 13 years after the Second World War. In this treaty, you have written down that the aim of the European Union and those treaty countries is an ever closer union between the peoples of Europe. So the aim at the beginning was that they get closer together at every step in time, an ever closer union. So it is the process that they want to grow together more and more, which is incredible at this point. And I think nobody knew what it meant at this point. But at every step, this Roman treaty is still important. It's called as well the. I always picked the wrong one. I don't know why that happens. Today it has a different title, but some of the ground part of the Roman treaties are in there as well. It's the Treaty of the Functioning of the European Union. Pretty boring title, but it is the cornerstone of most of the functioning of the European Union still. It takes care of when the European Union has to act and when they can engage in certain measures. And most of the time in the European Union, you won't see that it is that much about the rights of citizens, But when the European Union is tackling nation-state policies, they usually tackle it with one means they have, and this is the internal market. The internal market is their method of choice in most of the cases when it comes down to breaking down on national legislation. And this makes sense when you keep in mind that the economic part is the central idea. So, if you want to, we can talk about the enlargements. They are not that interesting in my opinion, but yeah, well, let's do it. So Denmark got into the European Union in '73. Usually not that interesting, but the Danish case is the first and only case where at least parts of a country that went into the European Union got out of the European Union again. We are talking about the neglected part of Greenland. Greenland decided in 1985 to get out of the EU as well. This is the first and only case where a territory got out of the European Union voluntarily. This means it is a precedent to a certain degree for other countries as well, that they could get out again, which is not completely uninteresting. The rest I just we have in '79 we have the first European election. I'm really sorry that my handwriting is so horrible, but we all have to deal with that. So the European Union usually is not perceived as incredibly democratic, right? Or I'm not sure if it's for you the same, but the idea that the European Parliament doesn't have that much power that is perceived like that. No? No opinions, no feelings on that? Okay. Then I share mine.
That is big and hugely efficient and democratic.
Yeah. In my opinion, not true anymore. At the beginning it was. So the parliament nearly had near to non-power. But it is interesting that the election started that early and nobody, I think, actually no one knows that in 1979 the first European elections were, right? It seems pretty early, right? But let's talk about something way more important than that. So, till this point we had the economic part. And it is actually not that unusual. You can look at it a little bit like the state perspective. The first thing that a state has to ensure, and usually this is the development of states, is that they have to establish internal and external security. This is the first and foremost usually perceived idea of a state. After that, it is the idea of taking care of economic growth, economic prosperity, that your country is getting richer. This is usually the second most important step. And you can see that with lots of countries that you have this development. So most of the authoritarian regimes, every monarchy usually was about the monopoly of power, not that much actually about economics at the beginning, but it was about the idea that I cannot kick your ass and get run free after that. That's basically the idea, that I cannot kill my neighbor and then live happily ever. That's the first idea. And the security part is in the first thing. The second thing of most monarchs or absolutist society is ensure that you don't get your ass kicked by the neighboring nation. So that you can actually have war. That you can doesn't matter. Fight is good. That you can fight a war. The same thing is true for the first part as well. After that, you have the development in most nations as well, that it becomes about economic growth. Especially when you look at Great Britain, Germany to a certain degree as well. We had plenty of different states, but the first thing they could establish together was a trade union. You have this in other countries as well. When you look at France, the first attempts were at securing the state, but then came mercantilism and the possibility that you actually get more out of it. So then you have the economic perspective. The third thing and the third step of most nations is the most difficult one and the hardest one. It's civil rights. And to be quite honest, plenty of countries still struggle. But this is what the European Union became about. I would say, this is my estimate, but I might be wrong on that, 85. This is the point where the European Union didn't become about goods anymore, but became, to a certain degree, about values, and the idea that it is about the individual and not just about the market. In 85, the Schengen Agreement was reached, which means that there were no borders anymore for the European citizen. And at this point in time, it means that you can walk from Vilnius to Lisbon without ever being asked for a passport. In theory, and if you're white. But no, you get the idea. So this is the idea of a civil liberty, and this is the first time that actually those civil liberties were established in a broad range between nations. The idea that you don't have borders between countries anymore, at least borders that you can cross without any problems, is incredibly important. This process started there and went on in, I think, 92, 93, don't let me know. Maastricht treaties? 92. 92, the Maastricht treaties. The Maastricht treaties are probably the most important European treaties you have. It means two things. Firstly, that my CA partner is now a citizen of the European Union, probably. So the East enlargement was decided, or the criteria for the East enlargement were decided in that point. The 90s were incredibly optimistic. In 92, the euro was established. The euro was officially introduced in 95. In the books, so in reality, it was established in 98. For the normal citizens, it was established in 2002. The numbers don't mean anything. This is not important. The important part is, at this point in time, they decided to do that. And this is 92. This is after the fall of the Berlin Wall. This is after the breakdown of the Soviet Union. This is when everybody in the world talked about a new world order. The idea that we don't know where we are going, but we have to establish something new. And this is what the European Union tried at this point. And they tried to do it twofold. Firstly, by ensuring civil liberties for the citizens. So the possibility that I can work everywhere in the European Union comes from the Maastricht treaties. That I'm protected with my health insurance in every European country comes from that. That I have certain rights. They were codified in that treaty, they were enacted in another treaty, but the idea that you have certain rights and certain protection under the European law, even when your country is acting against you, comes from the Maastricht Treaty. This is incredibly important because it was the idea that we are not just, now, at this point, we were just a bunch of states. Here, they became something different. And usually you tend to say that the European Union is intergovernmental institution sui generis, which means of an own kind. There's nothing like that. But the idea is they become incredibly state-like or a state of last resort to a certain degree for European citizens. Usually your nation-state takes care of you when you're a European citizen. But if the nation-state fails, you always have one net behind that, and this is the European Union. And this is incredibly interesting. There are small things that are handy. This is the idea that when I'm a Finnish citizen and I am in Zimbabwe and I get lost or get thrown into jail and there is no Finnish embassy, I can go to every European Union Union embassy and they have to take care of me as if I were their own citizen. This is the idea that I can go to the... that is the idea that we have the European Court of Justice, that even if your state forbids you certain rights because you are homosexual, because you... So, if you are discriminated fundamentally against your most basic rights, then you can go to the European Court of Justice, and this court is forcing countries to change their policy. We just had, in the European Court of Justice, we had this Facebook case, where it was about things like privacy, which is usually very national and is very different from state to state. But those rights are considered that universal that the European Court can override national legislation in those regards. And I wouldn't call the European Union a state at this point, because nobody feels that way. but it has an incredible amount of power that is almost state-like. And this is interesting. So the first thing is enabling civil rights. This was the idea that the European Union, in this optimistic area of a new world order, is not just about economics anymore, it is then about values. Because at this point, when you write down your values and rights, because rights always or usually tend to derive from values, you write them down and you establish a corps that is defending them, then it is about values. Secondly, by enlargement. The idea that the European Union needs to get bigger to play an important role in the world. At this point, once again, optimism, the idea is that we can enable all or most states, most former Soviet states that are close to the European Union, that they can come into the European Union and be part of this big bloc that then, this big value bloc that is the European Union at this point. And this is why at this point they started the process of including the following countries: Cyprus, Malta, the Czech Republic, Estonia, Hungary, Lithuania, Latvia, Poland, Slovakia, and Slovenia. A little later, Croatia. All those countries then got into the European Union, and with the idea that we build a big bloc that has a say in the world. So, that sounds great, and that was a nice idea to a certain degree. We then had a problem. 2003.
Can I ask?
Yeah, of course.
We played game about European Union, and the closing government won because they know more information about the Copenhagen criteria.
Once again,
The two Copenhagen requirements criteria in 1993.
Yeah.
Can you pay more attention to this?
Tell us about it.
So, how to get into the European Union is the
Yes.
question, right? There are, I think, 22 or 21 chapters. You have to close and fulfill every of those chapters to get in there. It no, is it wrong number?
No. Everything is.
So the thing is, at the beginning it was pretty easy, and it got harder and harder over time. So as I said, the 90s were very optimistic, and at that point, we said the idea was we want to invite as many countries as possible to be part of this European bloc. And you could go, those are the Copenhagen criteria, I think it's the name. We'll have to need to look them up. But it is fulfillment of the internal market, of course. It is a certain standard of that you can protect minorities. I would have to look up all of that. But it is that you comply with almost everything in the European Union, up to supply codes for natural gas, things like that. The thing is, at this point, they weren't that strict with those criteria. This is part of the reasons why it got harder now. So the countries that are now have official status that they want to apply for the European Union are Albania, Serbia, and Montenegro, Turkey, and Iceland. But I think Iceland is on hold when it comes to those negotiations. Then there are two countries with prospective membership status, so that they are not even at the level of those criterion yet. Those are Kosovo and Bosnia and Herzegovina. Those are the countries that have a prospect of getting this application. They have a prospect of getting an application. That's the level where they are. It is really hard, but it is hard from both sides. Firstly, the European Union doesn't want to enlarge that much anymore. This is a political decision. It's the idea that they are struggling to work with 28 countries at this point in time. But it is from the other side as well. So for some countries, it is not that attractive anymore to be part of the European Union. Turkey is purposely on hold when it comes to this application. Serbia is a little bit more difficult. It really depends on the government, let's say it that way. To a certain degree, you know that in Ukraine it is a question as well about the government prospects if you want to be part, if Ukraine wanted to be part or not, but not of the European Union at this point. There it was about the economic zone. This is the EEC still exists. Norway, for example, is in there. This is what it is about at this point. But this is a pre-requirement of getting the membership status. So you firstly need to go through all those lines, and to be quite honest, the European Union at this point, most officials feel that there are already too many member states in there and that it got too messy. And therefore, most of the officials put most of the applications on hold. Because the optimism of the 2000s, of the 90s is over, and I will explain to you to a certain degree why. And after that, we can talk about the prospects of the European Union. How will the European Union develop? 2003. As I talked about here, it was about the idea of a building block of the new world after the end of the Cold War. This, to a certain degree, ended in 2003 when the first Iraq War came across. I'm not quite sure if you remember Rumsfeld talking about the old Europe and the new Europe. The coalition of the willing, those countries who wanted to fight in the Iraq War, and those countries who didn't want to fight in the Iraq War. The old Europe were, of course, Germany and France, to a certain degree, actually he meant UK as well. But that's another question. He meant Sweden and Finland. He meant, I think, either Netherlands or Belgium wasn't part of the coalition of the willing as well. So the Central Europe. This was what he was talking about. And by this division of countries who were fighting a war and countries who weren't fighting a war, somehow this idea of being a united building block that actually have an external policy together fell to a certain degree apart. The idea that there is no common foreign policy of the European Union that is real existent. There's the idea of that, and people want to achieve that. And there is a high representative of the European Union for foreign relations. It was Lady Ashton, now it is Francesca, something like that, Francesca Muhigini or something like that, an Italian woman. But since nobody has heard of her, you probably haven't heard of her as well, right? So she cannot be that important. And this is part of it. So this division in foreign policy led actually to the idea that nobody really believes in a common foreign policy anymore. But a common foreign policy was part of the reasons of the 90s why the idea was there to ensure civil liberties. Maybe it's self-sufficient as well. But the enlargement definitely was to get more power and more say in the world. And this failed at the first test. And it failed at other tests too. It failed when it came to the war in Libya. Where German was abstaining the vote in the Security Council and not all countries were working together. There's actually near to non-war that the European Union is fighting together. There are peacekeeping missions, but that's more or less it. So, I just want to talk about one last thing, and this is the Lisbon Treaty. In 2007, there was the idea to have a common constitution for countries, namely France and Ireland. It was too specific and it was too close to a nation state or a state-like institution. Therefore, they voted no on the constitution. Therefore, the constitution was not enacted. The Lisbon Treaty came in there instead of this, and this is the founding bloc now. So, where are we now?
What about common currency, euro?
Yeah,
when it was established?
The common currency was, that's a funny story that not that many people know as well. The first idea was in 88 in Hanover. The heads of state talked about it, but Great Britain was against it, Germany was against it, France was in favor, and Italy was in favor as well. You know that till 1990, Germany was officially still occupied and had no official sovereignty. In exchange for the sovereignty that France would give Germany, they got the vote for the common currency. So it was a prerequisite of France to get the euro for Germany's reunification. Many people don't know that, but it's an interesting side note at least. So this common currency was then started in 1993 at the Maastricht Agreement. There's the prospect of it in it. The idea there is that France was hoping for a more stable currency. The Deutschmark, so the German currency, was a very stable one. The French pound had lost, I think, 20% of its value due to investors' attack in 1990. You probably know all the investors who actually attacked the franc at this point. It was George Soros who earned a lot of money doing that. And now it's funding us. It's a bit ironic, isn't it?
In different places.
Yeah, but no, he was attacking the franc. He was attacking the pound as well. He was attacking the Deutschmark as well.
The Baltic currencies.
Yeah, I know that he attacked Finland as well. Sweden as well. Sweden tackled that with incredibly high interest rates, but it worked. But it worked in Sweden. It didn't work in France. Yeah. So the interesting thing there is that the idea was to prevent that in the future to happen. France wanted to link its currency to other stable currency. Plus, it is good for a common market to have a single currency. This is probably true for Central Europe. It was a good idea for Greece in 2004. Different opinions on that. The thing is, it was a power instrument at that point as well. So it was the idea once again to keep Germany in check. Margaret Thatcher was incredibly skeptic of the German reunification. Because I think her famous quote is, "We beat them twice and now they're back again." And this all in 1 century. Mitterrand was very skeptical as well, and they were afraid of the German hegemony, which was unfounded for the first 15 years. But if you look at Europe now, you might say that they were not actually completely wrong. And this is what they were afraid of. The common currency was the idea of getting Germany into the center of the European Union and therefore working with it instead of against it. The good thing is that Ronald Reagan was, of course, in favor of the German reunification. It's pretty dull if you stand in front of a gate and say, "Open this gate, hit on that wall," and then they do that, and you're like, "Yeah, but I didn't mean it that way. You don't do that." And Gorbachev was an incredible help for this as well. So this is how the common currency got established, and the hope was once again twofold. For the citizens, it is incredibly handy. To be honest, it is handy. If I go to another country and I can pay with my currency, it makes me happy and gives me a good feeling. Secondly, there was the idea of stability. You had in the 90s, at the beginning of the 90s, you had the first very strong investor attacks. You had that before this to a certain degree as well, but in the 90s it really started that investors got so globalized and so powerful that it was harder to withstand from the test of the market when you were a small currency. This was the idea as well. And the third thing is, of course, business. It is handy for me as an individual, but it is way more handy for a company that is producing in France but has its headquarters in Germany and getting all its parts from various parts of Europe. And this is not uncommon. So the supply chains in Europe at this point were incredibly interwoven. So this common currency makes plenty of things way easier and way less risky. These were the founding ideas of it. But it was a political idea, first and foremost. It wasn't an economical idea. So I'm not quite sure if anyone of you studied economics. So do you know the markers of an optimal currency area?
Markets of optimal currency.
Mm-hmm. When should a region have a common currency and when shouldn't have it. Okay, then let's not make it quiz out of it. So economists say usually that I think 3 or 4 different criteria should be fulfilled. Firstly, free movement of capital. That's given. Free movement of labor. That's not really given because we all speak different languages. Some of us are mobile, but not all of us. If you don't have that, then you need a transfer system. The European Union doesn't really have an active transfer system. They have a passive transfer system. This passive transfer system is threefold. I'll come to that later. But it is not strong enough actually to buffer the strong differences of the various countries. Movement, labor, social exchange, and what was the fourth one? Yeah, different, same reaction to shocks, external shocks. So if you have the oil price going up, that means something completely different to Scotland and England, for example. This is why they are not an optimal currency area, because Scotland is exporting natural gas, whereas England is importing natural gas. For that criterion, they are not optimal. External shocks could be everything. It could be that capital is getting cheaper, that you have a war abroad, which is expensive. All those are foreign shocks. And if you have the same reaction, the easiest one is usually the oil price. If the oil price is going up and all countries react the same, then you don't need to have, then you can have the same reaction of the central bank. This is why it's that's just economics nerd. But we were talking about the Eurozone. The Eurozone is one of the 3 topics I want to talk about. And this is about how the European Union works in different cases. I want to talk about TTIP. I want to talk about Greece crisis and the refugee situation. And in all those different things, the European Union works differently. And this is interesting to me. TTIP stands for Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. This is the free trade agreement I was talking about. It is a free trade agreement of all EU countries and the USA. This would make this the largest economic area in the world. It would link those 2 markets way more strongly. There would be near to non-tariffs anymore between those countries. There would be an alignment of standards, and there would be the idea that you have investment security between those countries. There are, wait, Friday, right? Tomorrow there's a huge demonstration in Berlin against that, because free trade and globalization and that, and it's with the US, you all understand. And so it is a big deal in the European Union. Interesting is how the process works. And in TTIP, it works rather well. This is the interesting part. So we have the parliament working. Those are the 3, not, yeah, maybe the 3, no, it's not the 3 branches, but the 3 institutions in the European Union. It's firstly the European Parliament, the European Commission, and the European Council. It's a little unfortunate that they both start with C, but don't get me started with that. So the European Commission is leading the negotiations. They are practically the government of the European Union. They are the executive branch of the European Union, and they lead the negotiations. The European Council is something like the upper house of democracy. So all the nation states have a representative there. Not quite sure if you know that or not. If you all know that already, then I'm not talking about this. Would go on unless someone The European Parliament is a simple parliament. The thing is, the European Commission can negotiate a treaty, but the European Parliament and the European Commission Council both have to agree to this treaty before it is enacted. And the European Commission was negotiating something the European Parliament didn't want at all. The thing is then the European Parliament was going back and forth again, and now the European European Commission changed its stance on that, which is actually a working system in my opinion, that the government is reacting to the Parliament. Usually the relationship between parliaments and governments are pretty easy. The majority in the Parliament is usually what leads to the decision who is governing the country. That's pretty easy, pretty straightforward. In the European Union, it's a little different. The Parliament has a very strong say, and the Parliament is very independent. So you usually have in other governments, you have strong party lines and strong party fractions. So if you look at the UK with UKIP, the Liberals, the Lib Dems, Labour and Tories, you see that they usually vote along the lines. In Germany, it's way stronger than even in the UK. You vote along the lines. This is what's happening. In the European Parliament, you have, I think at this point, 172 different parties. They are all together in groups, but those groups are so different, it's incredible. So Viktor Orban is in the same group as Angela Merkel. This is how large those groups are. So the Hungarian party. There are way more things that the Social Democrats in Germany and the Conservatives, so the the center left and the center right in Germany have in common than the center right has in common with the center right of all other countries. So those differences are huge. Because those differences are so large, usually you don't have a party line, or you have a vague party line where 70% agree. And this means that the parliament is very independent to a certain degree, because nobody is actually pressuring them to vote in a certain way. Firstly, because of those party things, the parties are not that important there. Secondly, because there's not that much public scrutiny. Nobody really cares about that parliament. I could have asked, I think every European citizen, what's your member of the European Parliament? Nobody could name one. So I'm pretty sure, actually all of them had a problem naming more than 3 members of Parliament. Those are a lot. And this is a problem, nobody knows what they are doing. So, but this gives them the freedom to actually act a little more to their consciousness than along to party lines. You can say this is a good thing or a bad thing. Probably it's a bad thing that you don't have that much public scrutiny. Probably it's a good thing that they are not forced to always vote along the party lines, because that often leads to a very good consensus. So the stance of TTIP was changed. It was about investor trade tribunals. No, that's not the word I'm looking for. Dispute settlement, yeah. It's about international investor dispute settlement, which is basically a company can sue a country for reparations if their expectation of return are not met because of regulations that are highly exaggerated. Which means, to the opinion of the opponents, they say this means if Germany is allowing stricter environmental standards, then ExxonMobil, for example, can sue Germany, which is true, but according to the treaty, that means they will lose. But that's beside the point. So they want to change that, and this is to a large degree changed. So in TTIP it works. This is due to 2 facts. The European Union works perfectly if you have time and low impact. It is an incredibly important treaty, but the direct impact of on the people on the ground is limited. And you have plenty of time to negotiate a trade agreement that can easily take 5 to 6 years. Then the European Union usually works fine. So, now we have the Greek crisis. There the European Union, it depends who you ask if they work. Especially working in the German parliament, it's a little bit difficult to say because, as much as I know, we were the bad guys in this story. There were two basic ideas. Firstly, that pacta sunt servanda is, I think, the Latin term. The idea that you have to stick to treaties. You have to uphold treaties. This is the German position. The idea is, look, guys, you signed a treaty. If you don't like this treaty and don't want to pay back the debt, then we can understand that. We don't want to pay back our debt as well. But this is what you signed. This is your problem. Secondly, the idea is sovereignty. The sovereignty of the Greek people. The idea that a nation should, at every point in time, decide how it is governing itself. And there we have the problem that we had a big clash in the European Union. Some countries were of the opinion that it is important that the treaties are held up, because the treaties for them are the foundation of the European Union and the foundation of further integration. If you don't stick to the treaties, then the next country don't have an incentive to stick to the treaties as well, and this is why the European Union will erode. This is the position of Finland, Germany, the Netherlands, France to a small degree, Luxembourg to a small degree. Plenty of Baltic states, as much as I'm aware, right?
No, we're all fine with the EU.
No, you're fine with the EU, but you were against Greece, right?
Yeah, we're all against Greece.
Yeah.
We can't empathize with their problems, given that we have lower incomes than.
So this is part of the problem. So especially when you look at Estonia and as well as in Slovenia, both of them were incredibly pissed about the idea of a bailout for Greece, because they are saying, look, their wages, so their minimum wage is higher, their pensions are higher. Why should we bail them out? They firstly should cut their systems back, and it's unfair that we pay for a higher wage at another country. This is not how it goes. There are other countries who would say, yeah, but the price level is lower. That really depends on who you ask. They are back and forth. But this is the idea that you should stick to treaties, because with bailing them out, you set a precedent for future generations. This might erode the European Union. This is part of the idea. The other side is, this is more or less the idea for more Europe, even though it doesn't seem like this. The other side is the idea of less Europe. The idea that you're saying, yeah, treaty here, treaty there. But the Greece government needs the right to maneuver. They need the right to do whatever they want. And this is the idea that the nation state should always have the sovereignty over the European Union, which is a legitimate position as well. But this is, in short, it is the big fight about what is the European Union now. Is it more important than nation states? And we have the first fight at this small nation state, Greece. Greece has, I think, 2% of the GDP of the European Union. It's small. It's pretty small and pretty insignificant. So for the whole economic structure of the European Union. But on the other side, you have the idea that this is a precedent, and there we have to see if the nation state is more important than the European Union is more important. And I think for the first time, the European Union won this game. So with the help of Germany and France, Netherlands and Finland to a strong degree as well. The Baltic states, yes, as well. But against the South European states, for the first time, the European Union has established that its treaties are more important than a nation state in its sovereignty. But the treaties that they had were no EU treaties. It were European treaties. They were very closely linked to the European institutions, but they were a treaty and an organization besides the usual way that European legislation should go. It was a secondary mechanism. The ESM, the European Stability Mechanism, was established, but that's just the idea that you had a parallel set of treaties that were fighting the fight. Now the question is, with the regular treaties, can the European Union win against the nation state? That's the next stage we have. But don't get this wrong. On the precedent of the Greece crisis, we will have to question how the European Union will work in the future. This is the question, will it be more than just a union of states? There were other countries who had this problem and who are on the other side of the Atlantic. Let's solve this better than they did. The next thing is the refugee crisis. 10 more minutes?
Yep.
Yeah, I'm going on talking about the European Union. I'm fine with that. The refugee crisis is actually probably the most interesting thing. The European Union is not just struggling with it, it cannot cope with it. The countries
might or may not be emotional about refugees, so you may or may not listen carefully.
Yeah, I think sometimes listening to a workshop is not just about emotions, but can be. This is one of the crucial questions of the European Union in the 21st century, in my opinion. And there are different answers to that. One answer is to say, even though we have common values that we are built on, we are mostly responsible to our citizens. The most important thing for our citizens is that we represent them. A representation of citizens sometimes means that the government is xenophobic, that the government is not that prone to give the right to asylum. This is the answer that plenty of countries are giving. This is
Hello. Nice to meet you.
Yes, this.
Is this supposed to happen? Just spontaneously? Congratulations on
So, at this point, nothing works in this regard. So, we have the Dublin Free Agreement that is actually saying that the country where a refugee first arrives is the country where it stays. Everybody who knows that thinks it's a pretty stupid, damn stupid agreement. But it was established like that at the beginning, and sometimes it's hard to change. And this is what is happening now. Plenty of countries don't want to get more refugees, understandable, because it is hard to integrate people, and everybody knows that. And it is usually way more difficult to defend this position to the majority of your country when your country consists of people who don't like foreigners. And to be honest, the electorate is not always nice. Sometimes there are plenty of dicks in the electorate. And you have to deal with that. And countries do deal with that differently. So a majority of Germans at this point is still of the opinion that we can deal with it, but that's a very rare case and a very unique circumstance, in my opinion. In Austria, which has had a really large influx as well of refugees, the FPÖ, so the nationalistic right-wing government, not government party, is about to get for the first time in 40 years, the mayorship of Vienna. They are neck to neck at this point, but just to be clear how right-wing this person is, the person was saying, it's time that our party takes again the city of Vienna for the first time in 70 years. 70 years ago was 45. This is how right-wing we talk. We have in France the current frontrunner in the polls is Marine Le Pen with the Front National. We have in the Netherlands an extremely right-wing party of Geert Wilders, who is not the frontrunner, but one of the major players in this game, and one of the reasons why the conservative government of the Netherlands is not taking in any refugees. In Finland, you have the true Finns in the government. They are still the government. Yeah, right. which is, they are called the true Finns, so I think you get the idea. You have a right-wing government in in Denmark as well, which is locking down borders. You have in France a very limited capacity to take people in. Not capacity, but willingness. And when we talk about the UK, when Germany had on a weekend had 80,000 new refugees, David Cameron was so nice to agree that over the next 5 years, 25,000 Syrian refugees can come there. This is what we call in Germany a Friday. The question there is how can we divide this and how do we cope with it? And at this point, it doesn't seem like they will find an agreement. The agreement that they have is, I think, for 200,000 refugees, which is nothing. This is not what we're talking about. We're talking about millions of millions and how to resettle. We have the possibility to actually deal with this together. And there the question is, how powerful are the core parts of Europe? And the question is as well, how powerful is Germany? 5 years ago, I think The Economist ran a cover story, The Reluctant Hegemon. And the claim was Germany is not really actively engaging with European politics. A lot changed since then. Yesterday, no, 2 days ago, Angela Merkel was holding a speech in front of the European Parliament, which I think is an incredible thing that heads of state now regularly appear in front of the European Parliament. But she was basically saying, we have to take responsibility for that, and Germany will take responsibility, firstly, in Europe, and trying to renegotiate Dublin III so that everybody is taking a fair share, whatever that means, of the refugees. And secondly, she wants to take more decisive actions via the European Union and with the European Union, but under leadership of Germany abroad, to fight and combat the reasons for this immigration crisis, which could be in the best way mean that we supply Lebanon and Turkey with more funds, or the UNHCR with more funds to actually cope with this crisis. This is one possibility. But fighting the reasons for refugees can mean something else as well, and this means a common foreign policy under German leadership. And I'm a little bit afraid this is what she meant with that. And, I can see why plenty of countries in Germany are reluctant to follow German military leadership. But this is one way where it could go. This is one option of the future of the European Union. They grow closer together. There will be the possibility that the refugee crisis will be shared at least to a certain degree in equal amounts. This is an unlikely scenario. The next scenario is that we will find alternative solutions. This is that other structures besides the European Union will emerge. That you say that you have more multilateral treatments that work something out, like the European security mechanism, because the European Union works too slow with that. That you, for example, have bilateral agreements between Germany, France, and the Netherlands, something like that, that they equally share to a certain degree the refugees, that parallel structures would emerge. With that, it could happen that you actually have a decline of the European Union. You must not forget that in 2017, we have the referendum in Great Britain. This is the referendum the UK stays in the European Union. So most people in Brussels think they should leave anyways because nobody likes them there. But it's 20% of the GDP of the European Union. So it is incredibly important. Plus, it is one of the there is the liberal branch in the European Union, and this is necessary. That tends to want to have less European Union government. And I think it is needed. In this branch as well are, in my opinion, Poland, Sweden, I think the Baltic states to a certain degree as well. The liberal branch, less EU government.
Yeah.
The Baltic states. Some plus Croatia and some of the southeastern states. It's a little bit difficult there to drop You have as well, but and you have the more European Union countries, I would say, or the ones who believe in more stricter regulation on the European Union level. Those tend to be the more central and more southern states. What again? But France, Germany, Italy, Spain, Portugal are usually in favor of more regulation. And it's not about fiscal responsibility, that's something else, but in general they are in favor of more regulation and with the UK going out, the Liberal branch would have it way harder, firstly at home, to explain why they should stay in the European Union, and secondly, it would set a difficult precedent. So you have, as I said, strong right-wing movements all over Europe. Western Europe, there was not even starting to talk about Eastern Europe. In Eastern Europe, the right-wing movements are way stronger. So if we look at Orban, he's not just a center-right party anymore. If we are talking about Poland and Slovenia, we are a little bit skeptical. So we are just taking 200 Christian refugees. It's just not good enough if you want to uphold the idea of asylum in a country. This is, in my opinion, strongly right-wing, and in other people's opinion, just right-wing, but at least it is conservative. And those countries then have it will get more and more difficult for them to actually keep their stance on the European Union. That we have this balance between more European Union and less European Union. Because the less European Union part, the front runner was always the UK. Without the UK, it is not unlikely that the more EU parts will take over and will establish more and more strong rules. But this will make it more likely that other countries want to leave or become Eurosceptic as well. And this might actually lead to more and more countries either declining or the possibility that we have a complete standstill because a lot of regulation can be blocked in the Council. So, and the last thing, maybe a more optimistic one, they can solve the refugee crisis under the leadership of Jean-Claude Juncker. This is a possibility as well. So the sharing plan was introduced by the President of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker. And this is the idea that it should set a precedent of a reallocation of the refugees according to the economic strength of the country and its population. I think there are some other factors in there. It's a formula like this, but that's the general idea. And that with this precedent, you can actually establish a Dublin IV in the framework of the European Union. With that, you can actually strengthen the institutions and you have the possibility to make the EU gradually more and more democratic, because this is what it became. So the election results of the European Parliament went up and up and up constantly. So more and more people were participating. The rights of the Parliament were getting more and more important. For the first time, the front runner of the various parties was the person who was supposed to become the president of the European Commission. In this case. Plus, you have the possibility that maybe some people realize that Europe is just a good idea. So, does anyone have questions? Oh, yeah. Okay.
Через полчаса на третьем этаже.